Ethan started crying again, and I put down the newspaper I hadn't finished reading that morning. It was 7 o'clock on Saturday evening, and the little one couldn't calm down after his afternoon nap. As I got up from the chair, I felt my knees ache. Damp weather always affected my joints, although at 72 I was still in pretty good shape. Ethan was lying in the crib that Ryan and I had assembled a month ago. The same Ryan who had slept in that same crib 16 years ago, and then Chloe 11 years ago. Now it was Ethan, my third grandchild, the third child I would raise. Hush, baby, I said softly as I picked him up. It's time to eat. Ethan immediately calmed down, burying his face in my shoulder. The 2-month-old baby couldn't yet recognize faces, but he was already used to my hands and my voice. Like his two older siblings, he knew me better than his mother. I went down to the kitchen and started preparing the formula. Casey had breastfed for only 2 weeks after giving birth, then declared that it ruined her figure and interfered with her work, her job as a beautician at a beauty salon, where she spent her days doing women's manicures and telling them about her men. Grandma, can you help me with my algebra? Chloe appeared in the kitchen doorway with her textbook in her hands. My 11-year-old granddaughter was the spitting image of Casey as a child. The same blonde hair, the same gray eyes, but with a more easygoing personality. Of course, dear. Just let me feed Ethan first. Chloe sat down at the kitchen table and spread out her notebooks. I sat down next to her, holding the bottle with one hand and pointing to the problem in the textbook with the other. We sat like that for half an hour. I explained the equations, and Ethan sucked on his formula, occasionally sniffling. Where's Mom? Chloe asked, having solved another problem. Still at work. Saturday is a busy day at the salon. Chloe nodded without asking any more questions. She was used to her mother's absence. So was Ryan, who was now at a friend's house, preparing for his high school exams. After feeding Ethan, I put him in his rocking chair and started making dinner. It was a typical evening in our house in the suburbs of Charlotte, the same house I had bought 30 years ago when I was working as a chief accountant and thought I would grow old quietly, babysitting my grandchildren on weekends. At 8:30, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Casey was home from work an hour later than usual. The door slammed, and she walked into the kitchen, kicking off her shoes in the hallway. A 38-year-old woman in jeans and a blouse, with a tired but contented face. Hi, Mom. How are you? She kissed me on the cheek, smelling of expensive perfume. Fine. Ethan ate. Chloe is doing her homework. Dinner is in 10 minutes. Great. Casey glanced at her sleeping son in his rocking chair without touching him. Where's Ryan? At Daniel's, studying for their physics tests. Casey nodded and sat down at the table, taking out her phone. She began scrolling through her messages, occasionally smiling at the screen. Mom, I'm going on a date tomorrow, Casey announced, without looking up from her phone. I met a guy last week. Brandon, he works at a bank. We're going to a restaurant, then maybe a movie. I see, I replied, dividing the pasta between plates. You'll watch the kids, right? It wasn't a question. It was a statement, as always. Casey never asked if it was convenient for me or if I had plans. Of course, I said, placing a plate in front of my daughter. That's great. He's so interesting, Mom, and generous. He sent a bouquet of roses to the salon today. The girls were jealous. Casey finally looked up from her phone. I think we might have something serious going on. Chloe ate her pasta silently, but I could see her shoulders tense up. The 11-year-old girl already understood what her mother's romances meant. Brandon is divorced, no children. He wants a serious relationship, Casey continued. Unlike that jerk Steve. Steve was Ethan's father. He married Casey when she got pregnant, stayed for exactly 1 year, then filed for divorce and disappeared. He sent child support irregularly. How's Ethan? I asked. What about Ethan? Casey shrugged. He's a kid. You're doing great with him. Mom, do you mind if I come home late tomorrow? Casey finished her water. I might even stay at Brandon's. He lives downtown, and his apartment has a view of the city. Okay, I said, clearing the empty plates. After dinner, Casey went to her room to pick out an outfit for tomorrow. Chloe helped me with the dishes and then went to watch TV. I stayed in the kitchen with Ethan, who had woken up and was quietly cooing in his bouncer. At 9 o'clock, Ryan came home, a tall 16-year-old with a serious face beyond his years. He said hello, ate dinner, and talked about preparing for exams. He asked about Ethan and held him for a few minutes while I prepared the baby's bath. Grandma, is Mom going on another date? He asked quietly when we were alone in the bathroom. Yes, tomorrow evening. Ryan nodded without saying anything. At 16, he understood more than a teenager should. He understood that his mother was looking for a man who would solve all her problems, including the children from her previous marriages. At 10:30, the children went to their rooms. I put Ethan to bed and listened to him snoring in his sleep, small, defenseless, completely dependent on the adults who were supposed to take care of him. Sitting in my chair with my unfinished newspaper, I thought about tomorrow, about Casey leaving early in the morning and coming back late at night, if she came back at all, that I would spend Sunday with my 3 grandchildren again, as I had spent hundreds of weekends before. The house was quiet. Casey was talking on the phone in her room, probably with that Brandon guy. Chloe was reading in bed. Ryan was doing his homework. Ethan was sleeping in the nursery. And I sat there thinking about how many more evenings like this I would spend in this house. Sunday morning began with Ethan crying at 6 o'clock. I woke up instantly, as I always had during my years of motherhood and grandmotherhood. Light sleep had become a habit, developed over decades of caring for children. My feet touched the cold floor, and I threw on my robe and headed for the nursery. Dawn was just breaking outside the window, and the house was still asleep in the pre-dawn silence. Ethan was lying in his crib, his tiny arms outstretched and frowning in his sleep. His diaper was wet, and the time of his last feeding indicated that the baby was hungry. I picked him up, and he immediately calmed down, snuggling up to my shoulder. His little body was warm and soft, smelling of baby soap and that special sweetness that only babies have. Going down to the kitchen, I began to prepare the formula, rocking Ethan and quietly humming a lullaby that Casey used to sing, and then Ryan and Chloe. The words had long since faded from my memory, but the melody remained, and the children always calmed down to it. Outside the window, it was slowly getting lighter. The birds were waking up, and somewhere in the distance, a car engine started. A new day was beginning. After feeding Ethan, I made breakfast for the others, pancakes with maple syrup, a Sunday tradition I had kept up for many years. Chloe loved them with berries, Ryan preferred them plain with butter, and Casey, if she ate breakfast at home at all, ate one pancake with nothing on it, watching her figure. At 7:30, Chloe appeared, disheveled in her bear pajamas, rubbing her eyes. Ryan came down a few minutes later, already dressed and ready. He had a habit of waking up early and getting himself ready right away, as if he were preparing for an important day, not a normal Sunday at home. "Good morning, Grandma," Chloe said, sitting down at the table. "Where's Mom?" "She's still sleeping. She went to bed late last night," I replied, pouring her some orange juice. "Does she have a date today?" Ryan asked, taking a pancake from the plate. "Yes, tonight. The 3 of us will be home with Ethan." The children exchanged glances but said nothing. They were used to their mother's dates, just as they were used to spending Sundays with their grandmother while Casey took care of her personal life. Chloe said she wanted to finish a picture for a school contest today, and Ryan planned to study for his exams. Casey didn't show up until 10:30. When the children had already had breakfast and gone about their business, she came downstairs in her bathrobe, her hair tousled, yawning and squinting at the bright sunlight streaming through the window. She was holding her phone. Even in the morning, she couldn't put it down, checking her messages and social media. "Good morning, Mom," she said, sitting down at the table and immediately burying her face in the screen. "Are there any pancakes?" "In the oven, warm. Juice is in the fridge." I poured her some coffee and set a plate of pancakes on the table. Casey ate without looking up from her phone, occasionally smiling at what she was reading. Brandon had apparently already sent his morning message, and my daughter was making plans for the evening. "Mom, you don't mind watching the kids, do you?" she asked, finally looking up from her screen. "I'm meeting Brandon at 6, but I want to stop by Linda's salon to have my hair done. Something special, waves like movie stars." "Sure," I said, clearing the table. "Great." Casey finished her coffee and got up. "I'm going to get ready. I have a new dress, red, very elegant. I bought it especially for occasions like this." She disappeared upstairs, and soon the sounds of her getting ready could be heard from her room. The noise of a hairdryer, the click of heels, the creak of a closet door. Casey was preparing for the date as if it were an important event, as if her whole future depended on this evening. I picked up Ethan and went into the living room, where Chloe was drawing at the coffee table and Ryan was reading a textbook while sitting in an armchair. It was a normal Sunday morning, calm and uneventful. The sun was shining outside the window, the neighbors' children were playing in the street, and somewhere in the distance, someone was mowing the lawn. At 12:30, Casey came downstairs to show off her chosen outfit. The red dress was indeed elegant, form-fitting, knee-length, with a neckline that accentuated her figure. She paired it with black high-heeled shoes and gold jewelry. She looked stunning, but the outfit seemed too provocative for a daytime date. "How do I look?" she asked, turning in front of the mirror in the hallway. "Beautiful," Chloe replied, without looking up from her drawing. "Mom, what do you think?" Casey turned to me. "Very elegant," I said diplomatically. "I want to make an impression. Brandon is used to business women, and I'm going to show him that I can be different." Casey fixed her hair and looked at herself in the mirror again. "I'm going to change back, or I'll get my dress dirty. What time is Linda expecting me?" 3 o'clock, I replied, although she was asking herself rather than me. Casey disappeared upstairs, and the house fell silent again. Ethan fell asleep in my arms. Chloe was intently drawing an autumn landscape, and Ryan was taking notes in the margins of his textbook. I looked at the children and thought about how quickly time flies. Not so long ago, I spent Sundays with little Casey, who drew princesses and asked me to read her fairy tales. At 2 o'clock, Casey appeared downstairs again, this time in jeans and a simple blouse, but with her makeup already done. She gathered her makeup bag, put her red dress in her purse, and headed for the door. "Mom, I'm going to Linda's. I'll be back around 5, change, and go straight to Brandon's." She kissed me on the cheek. "Have the kids had dinner?" "I'll make them something." "Okay, I don't know what time I'll be back. Maybe late." Casey took the car keys. "You can handle Ethan, right? Call me if you need to, but only if it's really serious." "I can handle it," I said, as I had said hundreds of times before. The door slammed and the car pulled out of the driveway. Casey left to get ready for her date, leaving me with 3 children for the whole day. Nothing new, just a typical Sunday in our house. Chloe looked up from her drawing and looked at me. "Grandma, will Mom ever stay home on the weekends?" "I don't know, sweetie," I answered honestly. "Will this Uncle Brandon live with us?" she asked quietly. "No one knows that either." Chloe nodded and bent over her drawing again. At 11 years old, she already understood that her mother's personal life was unpredictable and that the only constant in her life was her grandmother. I looked at Ethan sleeping and remembered how it all began 16 years ago. Casey was 22 at the time, working as an assistant in a nail salon and dating Tommy Richardson, a young mechanic from a car repair shop. He was a handsome guy with a charming smile and plans to open his own workshop. When Casey got pregnant, Tommy disappeared from her life as quickly as if he had never been there. He just stopped answering her calls, and when Casey went to his house, it turned out that he had moved out without leaving an address. Her daughter cried for weeks and then announced that she would raise the child herself, but by herself lasted exactly until Ryan was born. As soon as the boy came into the world, Casey realized that motherhood was not just about cute little fingers and the sweet smell of a baby. It's sleepless nights, constant laundry, feeding on a schedule, colic, and crying. It was a responsibility 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. "Mom, I can't cope," she confessed to me a month after giving birth. "He cries all the time. I don't get any sleep. I can't work. Please help me." And I helped her, at first only at night, then during the day, while Casey was at work, and then on weekends. Gradually, Ryan began to spend more time with me than with his mother. I fed him, bathed him, played with him, and read him stories. Casey appeared sporadically to kiss him goodnight, show off her beautiful son to her friends, and take pictures for social media. When Ryan was 3, Casey met David Campbell, a car salesman who was divorced and had no children. 6 months of romance, an engagement, wedding plans. David was ready to accept Ryan as his own son, bought him toys, took him to amusement parks. Casey was glowing with happiness as she talked about their future life in a big house outside the city. But a month after the engagement, Casey discovered she was pregnant again. At first, David was delighted. Having his own child was his dream. But when the problems started, morning sickness, mood swings, the inability to lead his former lifestyle, he began to distance himself. And when Chloe was born and the house was filled with the cries of a baby and the chaos of caring for 2 small children, David announced that he was not ready for such responsibility. The breakup was painful. Casey cried again, complaining again about men who promise the moon and then disappear at the first sign of trouble. And I was left again with 2 grandchildren, 3-year-old Ryan and newborn Chloe. Then there were other men. Mark, who lasted 6 months, Jason, whom Casey dated for almost a year, Robert, who promised to marry her but changed his mind at the last minute. Each new romance began with the hope that this was the one who would make Casey happy and accept her children. But the children grew up with me. I bought them clothes, took them to the doctor, went to parent-teacher conferences, and helped with their homework. Casey worked, dated men, made plans for her own happiness, and the children remained my responsibility. When Chloe was 5 and Ryan was 8, Casey met Steve. It was her longest relationship, 2 years of dating, 1 year of marriage. Steve even adopted Ryan and Chloe and gave them his last name. It seemed that Casey finally had a real family. But when Ethan was born, history repeated itself. Steve couldn't handle the reality of fatherhood, especially with 2 teenagers in the house. Divorce, alimony, promises to stay in touch with the children, which remained just promises. And now, Brandon, another hope, another set of plans, another set of dreams of a happy family life. And I sit with my 3 grandchildren and think about how many more times this story will repeat itself. Ethan woke up and cried. It was time to make his formula. Chloe put down her pencils and offered to help. Ryan looked up from his textbook and asked if she needed help with the baby. The children were used to taking care of each other because the adults in their lives came and went, and only their grandmother remained constant. At 5 in the evening, Casey came home with a new hairstyle. Her hair was styled in large curls, which gave her a Hollywood look. She quickly changed into a red dress, touched up her lipstick, and hurried to the door. "Kids, I'm leaving," she called out as she fastened her shoes. Grandma, thank you for watching them. I don't know when I'll be back. See you tomorrow, said Chloe without taking her eyes off the TV. Good luck, Mom, added Ryan from the kitchen, where he was making himself a sandwich. Casey waved and ran out of the house, leaving behind a trail of perfume and the sound of her heels on the porch steps. The car started, and she drove off toward a new happiness that she believed in as sincerely as she had believed 16 years ago when she met Tommy, and the three children and I were left in the house, as always. Casey returned at 10:30 in the evening, when the children were already asleep and I was sitting in the living room reading a book by the light of a table lamp. The sound of the car on the driveway, the door slamming, the click of heels on the porch, everything was as usual, but there was something special about these sounds, more energetic and cheerful than usual. The door swung open and Casey entered the house, literally glowing with happiness. Her hair was a little messy, her lipstick was smudged, but her eyes were shining and a satisfied smile played on her face. She kicked off her shoes right at the door and walked into the living room where I was sitting with my book. Hi, Mom. She plopped down in the chair across from me, not caring that her red dress would get wrinkled. What a night! You can't even imagine how wonderful it was. I put down my book and looked at my daughter. It was clear from her appearance that the date had been a success, and she was in that state of euphoria she always experienced at the beginning of new romances. Her cheeks were rosy, her movements were lively, and her voice was full of excitement. How did it go? I asked neutrally. Great. Brandon is such a gentleman, Mom. He met me with flowers and took me to an expensive restaurant in the city center. He ordered wine that cost $100 a bottle. Can you imagine? Casey spoke quickly, jumping from one thought to another. And he's such an interesting conversationalist. He talked about his job at the bank, about his travels. He'd been to Europe, Italy, France. He showed me photos on his phone. I listened silently, recognizing familiar notes in her story. Every new man seemed perfect to Casey. Every first date was the best of her life. Every romance promised to be fateful. And every time she talked about it with the same enthusiasm, as if forgetting her previous disappointments. We walked around downtown after dinner, Casey continued, fixing her hair. He showed me his office and told me about his colleagues. And then we went up to his apartment. Mom, you should have seen that apartment. 20th floor, panoramic windows, a view of the whole of Charlotte. Designer furniture, just like in the magazines. I see, I said, closing the book. And you know what the most important thing is? Casey leaned forward, lowering her voice to a confidential whisper. He said I was special, that he hadn't met a woman like me in a long time, that he was tired of empty relationships and ready for something serious. I've heard those words many times, too. Every man in Casey's life told her she was special, that he was ready for a serious relationship, that he was tired of being alone. And every time my daughter believed those words as sincerely as a child believes in fairy tales. Mom, I think he's the one I've been waiting for so long. Casey got up from her chair and began pacing around the room, unable to sit still because of her overwhelming emotions. We have so much in common. He also loves Italian cuisine, also watches romantic comedies, also dreams of traveling. I looked at her and thought that shared tastes in movies and food were unlikely to form the basis for a strong relationship, especially when a woman has 3 children. But Casey never thought about such mundane things at the beginning of a relationship. She lived in the moment, dreaming of a happy future, fantasizing about how everything would finally work out. How are the kids? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Are they asleep? Good. Casey paused for a second, as if only now remembering the existence of her children. How's Ethan? Was he acting up? Everything's fine. He ate, slept, played with Chloe. Great. Casey nodded and started pacing the room again. Mom, do you know what Brandon suggested? What? I already had an idea where this was going. He said I could move in with him. Not right away, of course, but soon. He wants us to live together, to try to build a serious relationship. Casey's eyes lit up as she talked about it. Can you imagine? An apartment in the city center, close to theaters, restaurants, shops. I've always dreamed of living downtown. What about the children? I repeated my question because it remained unanswered. Casey stopped in the middle of the room, and her face clouded over for a moment. But only for a moment. She quickly regained her cheerful expression, as if chasing away unpleasant thoughts. Well, the children? She paused, searching for words. Brandon isn't ready for such a serious step yet. He needs time to get used to the idea of a family. We've only just met. It's too early to talk about raising children together. Meaning? I knew where this was going, but I wanted to hear it directly. It means that for now, the children will stay here with you. Temporarily, of course. Casey spoke quickly, as if trying to convince not only me but herself as well. A few months, maybe 6 months, until Brandon and I figure out how things are going. And then, when he gets used to them, we'll take the children with us. I was silent looking at my daughter, 38 years old, and she still believed in fairy tales about a man loving someone else's children and wanting to raise them as his own. She believed it despite her experiences with Tommy, David, Steve, and all the others. Mom, say something. Casey sat on the edge of the chair, looking me in the eyes. You understand, this is my chance at happiness. I'm 38 years old. How much longer do I have to wait? Brandon is a serious, mature man with a good job and plans for the future. What if he doesn't accept the children? I asked quietly. He will. Casey jumped up from the chair and started pacing the room again. He just doesn't know them yet. When he gets to know them better, he'll see how wonderful they are, and he'll definitely love them. Ryan is so smart and responsible. Chloe is so sweet. And Ethan is just an angel. What if he doesn't? Casey stopped and turned to me. A flash of irritation crossed her face. She didn't want to think about unpleasant possibilities, didn't want to spoil her mood with doubts. Why do you always see problems in everything? She sat back down in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest. Can't you just be happy for me? I've finally met a good man, and you immediately start looking for the catch. I'm not looking for a catch. I'm thinking about the children. And I'm thinking about the children. Casey's voice rose. I want them to have a father, a real family, and for that, I need to get my personal life in order. Even if it means leaving them, not leaving them, but temporarily entrusting them to you. Casey corrected me sharply. You're doing a great job with them. Better than me, to be honest. You have experience, patience, time. Time. She spoke as if my time had no value, as if I existed only to solve her problems and raise her children, as if at 72 I couldn't have my own plans, desires, or fatigue. Besides, it won't be long, Casey continued, ignoring my silence. 6 months at most, maybe less. Brandon said he wants to meet the kids, but first, we need to get to know each other better, see if we're right for each other. What if you're not? We will be. Casey stood up and started pacing the room again. Mom, you don't understand. I feel like I've been waiting for him my whole life. We're so alike. We have the same outlook on life, the same dreams. The same dreams. I wondered if those dreams included 3 children from previous relationships, but I didn't ask the question out loud. Mom, I'm moving in with him in a week, Casey announced, stopping in front of me. It's decided. He said he doesn't want to waste any time, that at our age we need to act decisively. I see, I said. Will you help with the kids? Casey sat down on the edge of the coffee table, looking me in the eyes. I know it's a big responsibility, but I don't have a choice. This is my last chance at happiness, you understand? Last chance. She had said those words several times over the past few years about Mark, about Jason, about Steve. Every man became her last chance, every romance a fateful one. What about Ethan? I asked, glancing toward the stairs where the 2-month-old baby was sleeping. He's still so little. That's exactly why. Casey perked up, as if I had said something important. He's still little. He doesn't care who takes care of him, and you're so good with him, better than I am. You've got a knack for it. You know what to do when he cries, how to feed him, bathe him. I don't care. Those words cut deep. A 2-month-old baby who was already used to my hands, my voice, my smell, and his mother said he didn't care. Mom, say you agree. Casey took my hands. It won't be for long, I promise. As soon as Brandon and I realize that we're serious, we'll take the children right away. Maybe we'll even adopt them all officially so they can have a real family. Adopt them. She talked about her own children as if they were orphans, that a kind person could take from an orphanage. Okay, I said, because I didn't see any other way out. Thank you, Mom. Casey jumped up and hugged me. I knew you would understand. You always support me, always help me when I'm having a hard time, when she's having a hard time. Not when the kids are having a hard time, not when I'm having a hard time, when she's having a hard time. I'll start packing tomorrow, Casey continued, letting go of me. I won't take much, just the essentials. I'll leave the rest here for now. I'll explain to the kids that Mom is moving, but she'll take them with her soon. What if they ask why not right away? I'll tell them that the new apartment isn't ready for them yet, that it will take time to set up their rooms and buy furniture. Casey shrugged. The kids will understand. They're used to it. Used to it? Yes, they were used to their mother appearing and disappearing from their lives, used to the fact that only their grandmother remained a constant in their lives. They're used to not asking unnecessary questions and accepting any explanation. Mom, I'm so happy. Casey started pacing around the room again, unable to sit still. Everything is finally falling into place. I feel like Brandon is my destiny. With him, I want to be better. I want to change. Change? I've heard those promises before. Every new man inspired her to change, to work on herself, to start a new life. And then everything went back to the way it was, and all that remained were the children, the tears, and me. Okay, Mom, I'm going to bed. Casey yawned and stretched. I have to get up early for work tomorrow, and then I'll get ready. So much to do. I need to let the salon know that I might change my schedule because I'll be living downtown. Maybe I'll even find a job closer to Brandon. She headed for the stairs but stopped halfway and turned around. Oh, Mom, one more thing, she said casually, as if she had just remembered something insignificant. Brandon isn't ready to meet the kids yet. He says it's too soon. So for now, it's better if he doesn't come here. And don't take the kids to see him. Meaning? Meaning they're all yours. Casey said it so casually, as if she were talking about pets being left with a neighbor while on vacation. You can handle it, right? Especially with Ethan. That little boy is your problem now. Those words felt like a slap in the face. That little boy is your problem now, not help out temporarily, not look after him for a few months, but your problem. As if a 2-month-old baby had really become my problem, not her son. Good night, Mom, Casey said and headed upstairs, where sleep and dreams of a new life with a new man awaited her. And I was left sitting in the empty living room, listening to the ticking of the clock and thinking about what I had just heard. This baby is your problem now. Those words summed up our relationship over the past 16 years. The children were my problem, and her personal life was her priority. Getting up from the chair, I turned off the light and slowly climbed the stairs. Ethan was breathing quietly in the nursery, and Ryan and Chloe were asleep in their rooms. Three children whose mother would announce tomorrow that she was moving in with a new man. Three children who would once again be left with their grandmother because their mother needed to sort out her personal life. Going into my room, I quietly closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed. Outside the window, the night wind was howling, and somewhere in the distance, a dog was barking. It was a normal night in a normal suburb, but one phrase kept running through my head. This baby is now your problem. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the ticking of the alarm clock on the nightstand. midnight, 1 o'clock, 1:30. Time dragged on slowly, and Casey's words kept running through my head. This kid is your problem now. It wasn't a request for help or a temporary solution to a difficult situation, but a statement of fact. A problem? My problem. At 2 in the morning, I got out of bed and went to the window. The street was quiet, with only the occasional car passing by and the windows of a few houses lit up. Someone else couldn't sleep on this Sunday, or Monday already. I looked at the familiar street, at the houses of neighbors I had been greeting for 30 years, and suddenly realized that I no longer wanted to live here. I didn't want to get up tomorrow morning to a crying Ethan, make breakfast for three children, take them to school, pick them up, help them with their homework. I didn't want to listen to Casey packing her things, happily talking about her new life with Brandon. I don't want to be the convenient grandmother who is always at home, always ready to help, always agreeing. Turning on the table lamp, I sat down at the desk by the window. The old oak desk, where I once did reports for the corporation where I worked as chief accountant. How many years have passed since then? 15? I retired at 57 when I realized that Casey couldn't cope with little Ryan, and I needed more time for my grandson. At the time, it seemed like a temporary solution to help my daughter get on her feet, get used to motherhood, find a balance between work and child, and then gradually return to my own life, maybe find a part-time job, take up a hobby, travel. I had plans, dreams of a peaceful retirement after my working years, but the temporary solution stretched on for years. First Ryan, then Chloe, now Ethan. First helping out in the evenings, then on weekends, then practically all the time. My life has quietly turned into serving other people's problems. I opened the desk drawer and took out a folder with important documents: passport, bank cards, insurance policies, will, everything that makes up the formal side of human life, papers that prove I exist, that I have a home, money, the right to make decisions about my own destiny. Home? I bought it in 1994 when Casey had just finished school and was about to go to cosmetology college. I dreamed of how I would entertain guests there, host family celebrations, how my daughter would come with her grandchildren on weekends, how everything would be like a family, but everyone would live their own lives. The reality turned out to be different. Casey never moved out after college. At first, she didn't have enough money for her own apartment. Then Ryan came along, and it became convenient to live with her mother, who could help with the baby. Then Chloe, then Ethan. And for 16 years now, the house has belonged not to me, but to all of us. But the responsibility for it has fallen solely on me. I took a sheet of paper and started writing a letter. At first, the words wouldn't come. I didn't know how to start, what to say, how to explain something I didn't fully understand myself. Then the pen moved across the paper on its own, writing lines in clear handwriting that I had developed over years of working as an accountant. Casey, by the time you read this letter, I will no longer be in the house. Don't worry, I'm fine. I just can't live the way I've been living for the last 16 years anymore. Yesterday, you said that Ethan was my problem. You may not have meant those words, but they turned out to be true. just as Ryan was my problem and Chloe was my problem. I raised your children while you lived your life. I'm not complaining. I love my grandchildren and was happy to take care of them. But I'm tired of being the convenient grandmother who is always there, always ready to help, always agreeing to any conditions. At 72, I realized that I wanted to live for myself. After writing this paragraph, I paused. Was I doing the right thing? Was it too cruel to leave the children? But then I remembered Casey's face when she said that Ethan was my problem, and I continued writing. The house stays with the kids. All the paperwork for it is in the safe, and you know the code. There's enough money in my accounts to support the house and the kids for a few years. You'll find the account numbers and passwords in the same folder. I transferred the house to you and the kids last year. I just didn't tell you about it. Now it is your property, and the responsibility for it lies with you, as does the responsibility for the children. Don't look for me. I don't want to be found. I want to live the rest of my life as I see fit, without explanations, without excuses, without having to help anyone solve their problems. I reread what I had written. It sounded harsh, but honest. Perhaps too harsh for a farewell letter, but I didn't want to leave any hope that this was a temporary decision, that I would change my mind and come back. Getting up from the table, I went to the closet and started packing my things. Not much, just the bare essentials. A few sets of clothes, medicine, cosmetics, documents. Everything fit into one suitcase, which I had bought many years ago for trips that remained only a dream. As I packed, I remembered my life, my childhood in a small town in Georgia, where my parents ran a grocery store, my studies at university, my first job as an accountant in a small firm, marriage at 23 to James, who died in a car accident when Casey was 5. After my husband's death, I raised my daughter alone, working 2 jobs to provide us with a decent life. Casey wanted for nothing. She had beautiful clothes, toys, books, and the opportunity to take dance and music lessons. I denied myself everything so that my daughter could be happy. When Casey turned 18, I thought that now I would be able to live for myself. Maybe I would get married again. There were men who showed interest. Maybe I could change careers, get another degree, start my own business. At 43, life is just beginning, but Casey needed help. With her studies, with her work, with men, with children. And I helped because I was her mother, because I loved my daughter, because I wanted her to succeed. As the years passed, I became more and more immersed in someone else's life, forgetting about my own. At 50, I realized that I would never get married. Who needs a woman with a grown daughter and problems? At 55, I realized that I would not have time to pursue a career. My time was spent caring for my grandchildren. At 60, I realized that I would never see the world. All my money went to maintaining the house and children. And today, at 72, I realized that I no longer wanted to live someone else's life. The suitcase was packed. I zipped it up and put it by the bedroom door. Then I went back to the table to finish the letter. Explain to the children that Grandma has left, but it's not their fault. They are good children, and I love them. But I can no longer be the only adult in their lives who is responsible for their well-being. You are now the mother of 3 children, not in words, but in deeds. The time has come to take responsibility. The house, the money, the children. It's all yours now. Do with it what you will. Maybe you're right, and Brandon will love the children. Maybe you'll be able to build a family. Or maybe not. Either way, these will be your decisions and their consequences. I'm sorry if this causes you pain, but I'm choosing myself, Mom. I folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and wrote Casey on it. Then I picked up my suitcase and quietly went downstairs. The house was asleep. All I could hear was the ticking of the clock and the faint sounds of the children breathing upstairs. In the kitchen, I placed the letter on the table next to the sugar bowl, where Casey would be sure to see it when she had breakfast. Then I opened the refrigerator and took out the bottle I had prepared for Ethan's nighttime feeding. I put it on the table next to the letter, so Casey would understand right away that night feedings were now her responsibility. In the hallway, I put on my coat, grabbed my purse and car keys. Then I paused, looking at the stairs leading upstairs. 3 children I loved more than life itself were sleeping there. Ryan, who called me Mom until he was 5, when he finally understood the difference. Chloe, who drew me cards for every holiday. Ethan, who would only fall asleep in my arms. For a second, I almost changed my mind. I almost went back to the living room, tore up the letter, and went up to my room. But then I remembered my daughter's words. This baby is your problem now, and I knew I had made the right decision. I quietly opened the front door and stepped out into the night. The air was cool, smelling of autumn and rain. The car started on the first try, a reliable old Toyota that I had bought 10 years ago and that had never let me down. Driving out of the driveway, I stopped and looked at the house in the rearview mirror. My home, where I had lived for 30 years, where I had raised my daughter, then my grandchildren, where I had been happy and unhappy, where I had dreamed and been disappointed, where I had gradually forgotten my own desires. Now it was their home, Casey's and the children's. Let them figure it out for themselves. I started the car and drove through the deserted streets of Charlotte. I hadn't decided where to go yet, but I knew it would be far away from here. Maybe Florida, where I had always wanted to live by the sea. Maybe California, to visit an old friend who had been inviting me to visit for years. Or maybe I would just drive until I found a place where I wanted to stop. At 72, I have the right to start a new life, a life for myself. The traffic light ahead turned red, and I stopped. My face was reflected in the car window, tired but determined. The face of a woman who had finally made a choice in her favor. Green light. I pressed the gas pedal and drove forward without looking back. Behind me was the house where Monday morning had begun, where in a few hours Ethan would wake up and cry, demanding to be fed, where Casey would come down to the kitchen for breakfast and find a letter next to the baby's bottle. But that was no longer my story. Casey woke up to Ethan's piercing cry at 7 in the morning. The sound cut into her consciousness like a fire engine siren, forcing her to wake up instantly. She lay there for a few seconds, hoping that the crying would stop on its own or that her mother would get up to check on the baby, as usual. But the crying continued, growing louder and more desperate. "Mom!" Casey shouted without opening her eyes. "Mom, Ethan is crying." Silence. Only the baby's cries echoed off the walls of the house. Casey waited another minute, then reluctantly opened her eyes and looked at the clock on the nightstand. It was 7 o'clock on Monday morning, and for some reason her mother was not responding to the baby's cries. Strange. Ruth usually got up to Ethan immediately as soon as he started fussing. "Mom!" Casey shouted louder, annoyed that she had to get up herself. The crying was getting louder. Ethan was clearly hungry and demanded immediate attention. Casey got out of bed reluctantly, threw on her robe, and left the room. The hallway was empty, and the door to her mother's bedroom was closed. "Mom, are you asleep?" Casey knocked on the door. "Ethan has been crying for 10 minutes. There was no answer. Casey turned the handle. The door was unlocked. Looking into the room, she saw a neatly made bed and no mother. Strange. Ruth never got up this early, especially on Mondays. Ethan's crying grew more desperate. Casey headed to the nursery, where the baby lay in his crib, arms outstretched and red-faced from crying. His diaper was dry, but the baby was clearly hungry. The time of his last feeding showed that he hadn't eaten in over 4 hours. "Hush, hush," Casey murmured, picking up her son. Ethan calmed down for a moment, feeling the warmth, but a second later, He cried even louder. He didn't recognize the smell, didn't recognize the arms. Accustomed to his grandmother, he demanded her specifically. "Where's Mommy?" Casey rocked the baby, trying to calm him down, but to no avail. The crying woke Chloe, who appeared in the nursery doorway in her pajamas, her hair tousled. "Where's Grandma?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "I don't know. Probably in the bathroom or the kitchen. Help me with Ethan." Chloe approached her brother and tried to calm him down, but the baby cried even harder. He wanted to eat. He wanted familiar hands. He wanted a familiar voice. "I need to make his formula," Casey said, handing Ethan to Chloe. "Sit with him for a minute." She went down to the kitchen, still hoping to see her mother there. But the kitchen was empty, except for a baby bottle on the table and a white envelope with Casey written on it. Strange. Her mother never left her letters. Casey picked up the envelope. But first, she made the formula. Ethan was crying so desperately upstairs that the neighbors must have already woken up. After heating the milk, she quickly went up to the nursery, where Chloe was trying to rock her brother. "Here, let me do it." Casey took Ethan and put the bottle to his lips. The baby began to suck greedily, sobbing from the stress he had experienced. Casey sat down in the rocking chair in the nursery and only then noticed that the house was too quiet. Usually, there were sounds in the morning, her mother making breakfast, turning on the coffee maker, walking around the house. Now it was quiet, like an empty house. "Chloe, go see where Grandma is," she said, without taking her eyes off Ethan. Chloe left and returned a few minutes later with a puzzled look on her face. "She's nowhere to be found. Not in the bathroom, not in the living room, not in the basement, and her car isn't on the road either." "What do you mean she's not here?" Casey looked up from Ethan. "I looked out the window. Only Mom's car is on the road, and Grandma's is gone." Casey frowned. Where could her mother have gone at 7 o'clock on a Monday morning? To the store? But the stores were still closed. To the doctor? But she would have warned them. To a friend's house? That was strange, too. Her mother didn't like to bother people early in the morning. "Maybe she left a note," Chloe suggested. "Yes, there's an envelope in the kitchen. Go get it." Chloe ran off and returned with a white envelope. Casey transferred Ethan's drink to her left hand and opened the envelope with her right. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, written in her mother's familiar, neat handwriting. Casey began to read, and with each line her face grew paler. Chloe stood nearby, watching the changes in her mother's expression. "What does it say?" the girl asked when Casey finished reading the letter. "Grandma left," Casey said, rereading the letter again, as if she couldn't believe what she had read. "What do you mean, left? Where?" "It doesn't say where. She just left. Forever." Casey slowly lowered the letter to her lap. Her mother's words didn't make sense. "I can't live the way I've been living for the last 16 years. Ethan is my problem. I'm choosing myself." What did that mean? How could she understand it? "Mom, what does forever mean?" Chloe sat on the edge of the bed, looking at her mother with big, frightened eyes. "I don't know," Casey replied honestly. "I don't understand it myself." She reread the letter. "The house stays with the children. There is enough money in my accounts. Don't look for me." Each sentence sounded like a final decision, like the will of a person who was leaving this life forever. "When will she be back?" Chloe continued to ask. "She says she won't be back." Casey showed her daughter the letter, although the 11-year-old girl could hardly understand the seriousness of the situation. At that moment, Ryan, already dressed in his school uniform, peeked into the nursery. The 16-year-old teenager immediately assessed the situation. His mother's confused face, Chloe's frightened expression, the letter in her hands. "What happened?" he asked. Grandma left, Chloe said. Forever. Ryan frowned and came closer. Casey handed him the letter. The boy quickly read it, and his face became serious. Did she really write that? He asked, returning the letter to his mother. Yes, I don't understand what happened myself. Everything was fine yesterday. Yesterday you told her about Brandon, Ryan said quietly. So what? I tell her about all my relationships. She's always supported me. Did you tell her you were moving in with him too? Casey fell silent. Yesterday's conversation suddenly took on a new meaning. She remembered her mother's face when she told her she was moving in with Brandon. She remembered the question about the children. She remembered her words about Ethan now being her mother's problem. I didn't mean to hurt her, she said. I just asked her to babysit while Brandon and I figured out if we were serious. Babysit, Ryan repeated bitterly. And how long is babysit? A few months? A year? Until Ethan starts school? Ryan, don't start, Casey said, standing up, still holding the baby in her arms. I have a right to a personal life. I'm 38 years old. I want to be happy. And Grandma is 72, and she wants to be happy too, replied the teenager. These words cut Casey painfully. She had never thought that her mother might be unhappy. Ruth always seemed content with her role as a grandmother, always ready to help, never complaining. She never said she was unhappy, Casey said. Did you ask her? Ryan looked at his mother directly, like an adult. Have you ever wondered what she wants? Or did you just assume that grandmothers exist to babysit their grandchildren? Casey didn't know how to respond. Indeed, she took her mother's help for granted. Ruth was always there, always helping, always agreeing. It seemed natural for a grandmother to take care of her grandchildren while her mother worked and pursued her personal life. But what am I supposed to do now? She asked, confused. I have a job. I have plans with Brandon. I can't just drop everything and stay home with the kids. Why can't you? Ryan asked. Grandma could. That's different. Why is it different? Because she's older? Because she doesn't have a right to her own life? Casey felt tears welling up in her throat. The situation was spiraling out of control. Just yesterday, she had a stable life, a job, plans with Brandon, a reliable mother who looked after the children. And today, everything was falling apart. Mom, what's going to happen to us? Chloe asked quietly. Casey looked at her daughter, then at her son, then at Ethan, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms after feeding. 3 children who now depended entirely on her. Not on their grandmother, but on her. And that thought caused her to panic. Nothing bad will happen, she said, trying to sound more confident than she actually felt. I'll figure something out. Maybe I'll find a nanny. Or I'll put Ethan in daycare. With what money? Ryan asked pragmatically. A nanny costs more than you earn, and daycare only takes kids 6 months and older. Casey didn't know how to respond. She had never thought about such things because she had always had a mother who was ready to help, free of charge, around the clock, 7 days a week. Maybe Grandma is just upset and will come back? Chloe asked hopefully. No, Ryan said firmly. She took her things and wrote a letter. This wasn't an impulsive decision. She planned it. How do you know? Casey looked at her son. Because I saw her suffering. I saw her getting tired. I saw her giving up everything for us. Ryan's voice trembled with emotion. And you only saw what was convenient for you. I didn't force her, Casey exclaimed. She offered to help. Because she loved us, Ryan replied, and you took advantage of that. His words hit home. Casey felt her insides tighten with shame and anger at the same time. Anger at her mother for abandoning them at such a moment. Anger at Ryan for his accusations. Anger at the whole situation that was ruining her plans. Enough, she shouted. It's not my fault Grandma decided to run away. I just asked her to help, like she always did. You said Ethan was her problem, Ryan said quietly. Casey fell silent. Those words did sound cruel, even though she hadn't meant them that way at the time. She was simply stating a fact that now the responsibility for the baby fell on the mother, as it always had. That's not what I meant, she said weakly. What did you mean? Ryan looked at her with the same expression Ruth usually had when Casey asked for help again. Ethan woke up and started to fuss. Casey tried to calm him down, but he cried louder and louder. The baby didn't recognize her hands, didn't feel safe. He was used to his grandmother, her voice, her smell. He wants Grandma, Chloe said, looking at her crying brother. Grandma's gone, Casey replied sharply, but immediately regretted her words when she saw her daughter's face crumble. Gone forever? Chloe whispered. I don't know, Casey admitted honestly. I don't know. She looked at the letter again. Don't look for me. I don't want to be found. It sounded final, as if their mother had truly disappeared from their lives forever. I need to call work, Casey said, realizing she couldn't leave the children alone. Tell them I won't be coming in today. What about tomorrow? Ryan asked. I don't know. We'll see. What about the day after tomorrow? What about next week? The boy wouldn't let up. What are you going to do, Mom? Stay home until Ethan grows up? Casey didn't know the answers to these questions. For the first time in her life, she was alone with 3 children, without her mother's support, without the ability to shift the responsibility to someone else, and that thought scared her the most. The phone in her robe pocket rang. Brandon. Casey looked at the screen and didn't answer. How could she explain to him what had happened? How could she tell him that their plans to move would have to be put on hold indefinitely? How could she admit that she had 3 children she couldn't leave with anyone? Was that Uncle Brandon? Chloe asked. Yes. Are you going to tell him about Grandma? Casey looked at her daughter, then at her son, then at Ethan, who was crying. 3 children, a house, responsibilities, everything she had tried to escape by moving in with a new man. I will, she replied quietly, and at that moment she realized that her mother was right. The children really had become her problem, but not because Ruth had decided so, but because that was how it should have been from the beginning. I had been driving on the interstate for 3 hours when the sun rose completely above the horizon. I glanced in the rearview mirror from time to time at Charlotte, which was gradually disappearing behind the hills. The city where I had lived for 30 years, where I had raised my daughter and grandchildren, was getting smaller and smaller until it became a barely discernible speck on the horizon. The radio played old songs from the 70s, the music I danced to in my youth when I was just Ruth, not Casey's mother and grandmother of 3. Carole King's voice poured from the speakers, reminding me of a time when I had my own dreams and plans that had nothing to do with other people's problems. My phone lay on the passenger seat, turned off. I knew Casey would find it soon, and the calls would start coming in. But I didn't want to hear the tears, the reproaches, the pleas to come back. My decision was final, and no amount of persuasion could change my mind. As I passed the sign for Columbia 50 miles, I remembered how 17 years ago I had driven down this same road with little Casey to visit my sister Elizabeth. My daughter was 21 at the time, and she was crying because Tommy had left her while she was pregnant. I comforted her, promising that everything would be fine, that together we could overcome any difficulties. Elizabeth said to me then, Ruth, don't sacrifice your life for other people's problems. Casey is an adult. Let her deal with the consequences of her own decisions. But I didn't listen. I decided that a mother should help her daughter, that family is sacred, that a grandmother should take care of her grandchildren. Now, 17 years later, I realized that Elizabeth was right. Sacrifice did not make Casey stronger or more responsible. On the contrary, it turned her into someone who takes other people's help for granted and is unable to cope with difficulties on her own. There was enough gas in the tank to get to Florida, where I was headed. My wallet contained credit cards and cash, enough money to get a hotel room and think about my next steps. At 72, I still had time to start a new life. I can imagine the look on Casey's face when she read the letter. First, bewilderment. Where could her mother, who never left her children alone, have disappeared to? Then shock at the realization that I was gone forever. Then panic. What to do with 3 children, how to balance work and motherhood, how to explain to Brandon that the move would have to be postponed. I wonder if she has already called Brandon. Has she told him that his grandmother has disappeared and now there is no one to look after the children? Or is she still thinking about how to get out of this situation, how to find a replacement for me? A nanny, relatives, friends, anyone, as long as she doesn't have to take responsibility herself. But a nanny is expensive, and Casey's salary at the beauty salon doesn't cover such expenses. Her relatives live far away and have their own concerns. Her friends also work and are not willing to babysit other people's children for free. Sooner or later, she will have to realize that there is no way out. She will have to take care of the children herself. After driving for another half hour, I stopped at a gas station to buy coffee and stretch my legs a little. It was a small roadside shop selling sandwiches, drinks, and souvenirs for tourists. Behind the counter sat a woman of about 50 with a tired face and sad eyes. "Going far?" she asked, pouring coffee. "To Florida," I replied. "To visit relatives?" "No, just because. I decided to see the ocean." The woman nodded understandingly. Sometimes I also want to just pick up and go wherever my eyes take me, especially now that my children are grown and no longer need constant care. She sighed. "But I have young grandchildren, and my daughter often asks me to babysit. You know how it is." "I know," I said. "I know very well. But you managed to get away. You're lucky. Not every grandmother would dare to take such a trip alone. If only she knew that this wasn't just a trip, but an escape. That I don't plan to return to my grandchildren and daughter. That for the first time in 17 years, I chose myself over their needs." Leaving the store with coffee in my hands, I sat down on a bench next to the gas station and looked at my phone. 12 missed calls from Casey. So she had already found the letter and realized what had happened. She probably thought at first that it was a prank or a momentary lapse of reason. Then she checked my closet and saw that my things were gone. I wonder what she told the kids. Did she explain the truth or make up some story about a sudden trip to Grandma's? Ryan, of course, would have understood right away what was going on. At 16, he's old enough to assess the situation soberly. Chloe is probably crying and asking when Grandma will be back. And Ethan just wants to eat and doesn't understand why the woman with the familiar smell and voice no longer picks him up. Poor little guy. It's not his fault that his mother treats motherhood as an annoying interference in her personal life. It's not his fault that he has become a symbol of my slavery, the last straw that broke the camel's back. In a different situation, I could have loved him simply as a grandmother without having to replace his parents. But I had to choose between him and myself, and I chose myself. After finishing my coffee, I returned to the car and drove back onto the highway. Ahead of me lay Florida, the ocean, a new life. Behind me were my house in Charlotte, 3 children, and a daughter who, for the first time in her life, was left alone with her problems. Maybe this will teach her to appreciate what she has. Maybe she will understand the price of my help. Or maybe she would just find a new way to shift the responsibility onto someone else. In any case, it was no longer my problem. The radio switched to the news. The announcer talked about traffic jams, the weather forecast, and world events. Life went on as usual. People drove to work, went about their business, and made plans for the future. And I was part of that flow, an ordinary woman in a car, going about her business. Not a grandmother who should be sitting at home with her grandchildren. Not a mother who should be solving her daughter's problems. Just Ruth, who at 72 had decided to live for herself. The phone rang again. Casey. I looked at the screen, where the familiar name was flashing, and pressed the reset button. Then again, and again. Finally, I took the battery out of my phone and put it in the glove compartment. Let him think my battery was dead or I had no signal. An hour later, I entered South Carolina. The landscape outside the window changed. The hills became gentler, the air warmer, the vegetation richer. I was heading for the sea, for the sun, for the life I had dreamed of for many years but could never afford. I remembered how 10 years ago I wanted to go to Florida for a week, see the ocean, sunbathe, just take a break from my constant worries. But just then, Chloe came down with chicken pox, and Casey couldn't take time off from work. We had to postpone the trip. Then there were other reasons. Ryan broke his arm and had to be taken to the doctor, and Casey started another romance and disappeared in the evenings. Vacation plans were postponed year after year until I stopped making them. Why dream about something that won't come true anyway? Why get upset about canceled trips? It's easier to accept the role of a stay-at-home grandmother who is always there. But today, I was finally going to the sea. Not for a week, not for a month, but forever. Or for as long as I wanted. At 72, for the first time in my life, I had no obligations to other people. Driving past small towns, I thought about where I could stay. Rent an apartment by the sea, find a part-time job, something simple but interesting. Maybe get a job at a library or a museum, or maybe do nothing at all, just enjoy the freedom and peace. My money would allow me not to work for several years. My pension plus my savings plus the sale of some valuables would be enough for a modest but comfortable life. I had always been good with money, knowing how to save and spend wisely. My skills as a chief accountant hadn't gone anywhere. But what would happen to the house? Casey would have to maintain it, pay for utilities, repairs, taxes. It won't be easy on her salary, especially with 3 children to care for. She may have to sell it and move to a smaller, cheaper apartment. Or find a man who will agree to marry a woman with 3 children and take on the responsibility of supporting the family. But there are few such men, and those who are available usually have their own problems and are not eager to solve those of others. Brandon is unlikely to be one of them. A bank employee, accustomed to order and comfort, is unlikely to want to tie his life to the chaos that is inevitable in a house with 3 children, especially with a baby who cries at night and requires constant attention. Most likely, this romance will end the same way as the previous ones. First, Casey will try to hide the extent of the problems. Then Brandon will figure it all out himself, followed by explanations, arguments, and a breakup. And my daughter will be left alone with the children again, but this time without my help. Driving into a small town, I stopped at a cafe for lunch. It was a cozy place with checkered tablecloths and the smell of home cooking. At the next table sat an elderly couple, peacefully eating lunch and discussing their plans for the evening. The woman was holding a travel agency brochure. They were probably planning a trip. "Do you remember when we wanted to go to Europe when the children were little?" the woman said to her husband. "We kept putting it off until they grew up and moved away. But now we can afford anything we want," replied the man. "No one bothers us or asks us to babysit our grandchildren." "What about Lisa? She asked us to help with her baby while she's at work." "Lisa is a grown woman. Let her solve her own problems. We've done our part." I listened to their conversation and realized that this man was wiser than me. He was able to say no to the requests of his adult children and defend his right to his own life. And I had been saying yes to all of Casey's requests for 17 years until I realized that I was simply disappearing as a person. After lunch, I got back in the car. It was about a 2-hour drive to the Florida border. By evening, I would be at the sea, in a new life that was beginning today. Casey must have realized by now that I wasn't answering her calls. She might even have gone to the police and reported me missing. But the letter would prove that I had left voluntarily, that it was my conscious decision. The police wouldn't look for me, and if they did, I would say that I had the right to live where I wanted, that at 72, I was old enough to make decisions about my own destiny, and that I no longer want to be a convenient grandmother for my adult daughter who has never learned to take responsibility for her own life. The sun was setting when I saw the first palm trees outside the window. Florida greeted me with warm air and the smell of the sea. Ahead of me was a new life that I had finally decided to start. I entered St. Augustine as the sun was already sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The old town greeted me with narrow streets, ivy-covered buildings, and the smell of salty sea air. For the first time in many years, I felt like a tourist, a woman going on vacation, not a mother and grandmother rushing home to her children. The Ocean Breeze Motel was located 2 blocks from the beach, a modest one-story building with blue walls and white shutters. An elderly man in a Hawaiian shirt sat behind the front desk and smiled warmly when I entered the lobby. "Welcome to St. Augustine, ma'am. How many nights are you planning to stay?" he asked, handing me a registration card. "I don't know yet. A week for sure, maybe longer," I replied, filling out the form. "Perfect. Room 14 with an ocean view. Breakfast is served from 7 to 10 in the morning at the nearby cafe. Wi-Fi is free. The password is written on the card." The room was small but cozy. There was a double bed with a white bedspread, an old chest of drawers, an armchair by the window, and a small table. Most importantly, there was a wide window overlooking the ocean, which stretched to the horizon, sparkling in the rays of the setting sun. Putting my suitcase on the floor, I walked over to the window and, for the first time in many years, simply looked at the beauty without thinking about feeding the baby, making dinner, or helping with homework. The waves rolled steadily onto the sandy shore, seagulls circled above the water, and somewhere in the distance, white yacht sails were visible. This was exactly what I had dreamed of for many years. Silence, peace, the opportunity to be alone with myself. No one demanded my attention. No one needed help. No one considered my time and energy their property. After putting my things away in the dresser, I remembered the phone that had been lying turned off in my purse since morning. It was time to check what had been happening at home while I was away. I put the battery back in, turned on the phone, and waited for it to find a network. The screen immediately lit up with notifications. 37 missed calls from Casey, 12 voicemails, 23 text messages. The call numbers showed that the first one was at 7:30 a.m., which meant my daughter had found the letter pretty quickly. I read the text messages first. The first ones were short and confused. "Mom, where are you? Call me urgently. What's going on?" Then came the longer ones full of panic. "Mom, I don't understand what the letter says. Is this some kind of mistake? Please call me and explain what's going on." The last messages were desperate. "Mom, please come back. I can't handle the kids. Ethan won't stop crying. I don't know what he wants. Chloe keeps asking when you're coming back, and I don't know what to tell her." I put down my phone and walked over to the window. The sun was already sinking below the horizon, leaving only a faint pink glow in the sky. Somewhere 400 miles away, my daughter was alone with 3 children for the first time in her life, with no one else to turn to for help. I imagined how her day had gone. In the morning, the shock of finding the letter, trying to call me, explaining to the children. Then, a missed day at work, a call to her boss with apologies and a request for the day off. Feeding Ethan, who was crying and wouldn't calm down in someone else's arms. Preparing food for the older children, who were used to their grandmother making lunch. I picked up the phone and played the first voicemail message. Casey's voice sounded confused and frightened. "Mom, it's me. I found your letter. I don't understand anything. What does gone forever mean? This is a joke, right? Call me immediately and explain what's going on. The kids are asking where you are, and I don't know what to tell them." The second message was recorded an hour after the first. "Mom, why aren't you answering? I've been calling for 2 hours. Ethan won't stop crying. He doesn't want me to hold him. Chloe is crying and asking for Grandma. Ryan is quiet, but I can see he's upset. What should I do? I can't handle 3 kids on my own." There was a note of panic in her voice. For the first time, Casey realized the magnitude of the responsibility that had fallen on her shoulders. The third message was angry. "Mom, this is cruel. How can you abandon your children? I understand that you're upset about what I said yesterday, but that's no reason to run away from home. You're acting like a spoiled little girl, not a grown woman." A spoiled little girl. An interesting description for a woman who had sacrificed herself for her daughter and grandchildren for 17 years. Apparently, in Casey's mind, the desire to live her own life was a whim. The fourth message sounded pleading. "Mom, I'm sorry if I said something wrong. I didn't mean to hurt you. Just come back, please. I need your help. I don't know how to take care of Ethan. I don't know how to calm the children down. You can't abandon us." I can't abandon you. That's what she had been counting on her whole adult life, that her mother would never abandon her, that she would always help her, that she would always be there when she needed her. The fifth message was the longest. "Mom, I've been thinking about your letter all day. Maybe you're right, and I really am asking too much of you. But let's talk about it and find a compromise. I'm ready to help more with the children, to take on more responsibilities. Just don't leave forever. The children love you, they need you, and so do I." Compromise. She still didn't understand that the time for compromise was over, that I was tired of looking for a happy medium between her needs and mine, that at 72, I had the right to be selfish. I listened to the rest of the messages. They were a mixture of anger, despair, attempts to bargain, and promises to change. But none of them showed any understanding that I had a right to my own life. Casey still saw my departure as a temporary grievance that could be resolved with persuasion and promises. Turning off my phone, I went down to the motel lobby, where there was a vending machine with soft drinks. I took a can of Diet Cola and went out onto the veranda, which overlooked the ocean. Several guests were sitting in wicker chairs, chatting peacefully and enjoying the evening breeze. At the next table sat a couple in their 60s. He was reading a newspaper. She was knitting. They were silent, but it was the comfortable silence of people who have known each other for a long time and don't need constant communication. "It's a beautiful evening," said the woman, noticing my gaze. "Yes, it's very beautiful here," I replied. "Is this your first time in St. Augustine?" "Yes, I decided to see the ocean. It's a great place to relax. We've been coming here every year for 15 years in a row. As soon as our grandchildren grew up and stopped demanding constant attention, we started traveling." She smiled. "You know how it is. When the children are young, grandparents are always on call." "I know," I said quietly. And then suddenly you realize that life isn't over, that there's still a lot you can do. Over the years, we've traveled half the country, and next year we're planning to visit Europe. Her husband put down his newspaper and joined the conversation. At first, it was hard to say no to the children when they asked to babysit the grandchildren. But then we realized if we don't start living for ourselves now, when will we? When we're 80? How did the children react? I asked. At first, they were offended, the woman replied honestly. They said we were selfish, that grandmothers should help the family, but then they got used to it. They learned to cope on their own and became more independent, and now they even thank us for teaching them that. Those words gave me hope. Maybe Casey will also understand sooner or later that my departure was not cruelty, but a necessity, that sometimes you have to break the vicious circle of dependence so that all parties can grow up. Back in my room, I took a shower and went to bed with the book I had brought with me, an Agatha Christie detective story, light reading for relaxation. For the first time in many years, I could read without listening for sounds from the nursery, without expecting to have to get up to a crying child. Outside the window, the surf was roaring, and somewhere in the distance, music was playing from a coastal restaurant. The sounds of a peaceful resort evening, which had nothing to do with the usual sounds of my home. A baby crying, the TV in the living room, the washing machine in the basement. Around 10 o'clock in the evening, the phone rang again. Casey. I stared at the flashing screen for a long time, then pressed the reset button. A minute later, the phone rang again. I pressed reset again and again. The fourth time, I finally answered. Mom, thank God you finally picked up. Casey's voice was full of relief and tears. Where are you? When will you be back? I'm not coming back, Casey. What do you mean you're not coming back? You can't just abandon us like that? I can, and I already have. But the children? Ethan is so little. He's been crying all day. He won't take his bottle. He needs his grandma. He needs his mother. You're his mother, Casey. I don't know how. Her daughter's voice broke into a cry. I don't know what to do when he cries. I don't know why he won't sleep. I'm afraid I'm doing something wrong. You'll learn, just like I learned 38 years ago with you. But you had experience. Where from? You were my first child. I didn't know what to do when you cried either, but I learned because I had no choice. Those were different times, Casey cried into the phone. Everything is more complicated now. I need a job. I need to earn money. Then find a solution. Daycare, a nanny, relatives, or change your life so that you can combine work and children. What about Brandon? What should I tell him? The truth, that you have 3 children and no nanny. He'll leave me, maybe, or he'll love you and the kids. Either way, it's your life and your decisions. Mom, don't do this. Casey's voice became pleading. I know I was wrong, but we can change everything. I'll help more. I'll be more attentive to you. It's too late, Casey. I'm tired of being a convenient grandmother. I want to live for myself. But what am I supposed to do? I can't manage on my own. You can, because you have no choice. I hung up and turned off the phone. The conversation was painful but necessary. Casey needed to understand that the days of free help were over, that at 38, it was time to take responsibility for her life and her children. Outside the window, the surf continued to roar. I opened the book to the page where I had left off and continued reading. Hercule Poirot was unraveling another mystery, and I was enjoying the peace and quiet of my first evening of freedom. Monday began with me sleeping in until 9 in the morning for the first time in 17 years. No one woke me up with a baby's cry. No one needed to be fed, dressed, or taken to school. I lay in bed, listening to the sound of the surf outside the window and enjoying the silence, which seemed almost unnatural after long years of living in a house full of children's voices. During my week in St. Augustine, I managed to settle into my new life. Every morning began with a walk on the beach, where I collected shells and simply enjoyed the view of the endless ocean. Then I had breakfast at a small cafe near the motel, where the waitress, Dolores, already knew my order. oatmeal with berries and coffee without sugar. After breakfast, I usually walked around the historic city center, looking at old buildings, stopping at souvenir shops and secondhand bookstores. For the first time in many years, I had time to just wander aimlessly, stop wherever I wanted, buy whatever I liked, without thinking about the children waiting at home and the need to hurry up and make lunch. On Tuesday, I met Esther, an elderly woman who lived in a small house near the beach and fed the seagulls every morning. We started talking by the water, and it turned out that we had a lot in common. We were both widowed early, we both raised children alone, and we both sacrificed our own interests for the sake of our families for many years. I also ran away from my grown children, Esther confessed, throwing breadcrumbs to the birds. 5 years ago, when I realized that they only saw me as a free babysitter and housekeeper, my son brought my grandchildren every day, and my daughter constantly asked me to babysit, and I kept waiting for the day when I could live for myself. And how did they react? I asked. At first, they were shocked. Then they were angry and accused me of being selfish. But after a year, they learned to cope on their own. And now they're even grateful. They say they've become more independent and stronger. Those words encouraged me. So I wasn't the only mother who decided to put herself first. So my action wasn't monstrous selfishness, but a normal reaction to years of self-sacrifice. On Wednesday, I went to the local library and signed up as a reader. A young librarian showed me the reading room with large windows overlooking the garden, where palm trees grew and hibiscus bloomed. I picked up a few novels that I had wanted to read for years, but never found the time. Are you staying with us for a long time? The librarian asked as she filled out my card. I don't know yet. Maybe I'll stay forever. There are many people here who came for a week and stayed for years. The girl smiled. Something about this place encourages a quiet life. A quiet life. That's exactly what I wanted. To wake up in the morning and not know in advance what the day would bring. Not to plan my time around my children's needs. Not to adjust to other people's plans and problems. Casey called me several times every day. At first, I didn't answer, but then I decided it was better to listen to her complaints and firmly say no to all her requests to come back. Let her get used to the idea that there will be no more help. On Thursday evening, she called, sounding particularly upset. Mom, I'm having a terrible day. Ethan didn't sleep all night. He cried until morning. I didn't sleep either, and in the morning I had to take Chloe to the dentist. In the queue, Ethan started screaming again. Everyone was looking at me like I was a bad mother. All babies cry, I replied. It's normal. But he didn't behave like that with you. He was calm with you. Because I was experienced. Experience comes with practice. I don't want to practice. Casey's voice broke into a scream. I want someone else to know what to do. I want you to come back and help. I'm not coming back. But why? My daughter cried into the phone. What did I do? Couldn't you have just told me you were unhappy instead of running away? I told you many times. You didn't listen. When did you tell me? Every time you sighed and agreed to babysit, every time I canceled my plans for yours, you just didn't pay attention. Casey was silent for a few seconds, apparently thinking about my words. But I didn't force you. You offered to help. Because I loved my grandchildren, and because I was afraid you wouldn't be able to handle them on your own. And you were right to be afraid. I really can't handle it. Casey started crying again. Ryan has shut himself off. He hardly talks to me. Chloe keeps asking when Grandma is coming back. And Ethan, he doesn't even want to eat properly when I feed him. I felt sorry for my grandchildren, especially little Ethan, who didn't understand why the familiar voice and hands had disappeared. But pity couldn't make me go back to my old life. The kids will get used to it, I said. They just need time. And Brandon left me, Casey blurted out. I wasn't surprised by this news. A bank employee with an orderly life could hardly fit the chaos of 3 children into his plans. What happened? I asked, not out of curiosity, but because I needed to listen to my daughter. He came to see me on Monday wanting to take me with him, and home was a complete nightmare. Ethan was screaming, Chloe was crying, Ryan was frowning. I tried to explain that it was temporary, that everything would be fine soon. But he said he didn't sign up for this kind of trouble. I see. You see? Casey's voice turned angry. This is all your fault. If you hadn't run away, he wouldn't have seen all this chaos. We could have dated normally and then gradually introduced him to the kids. Sooner or later, he would have seen the truth anyway. Not necessarily. Maybe he would have loved me so much that he would have accepted the kids. Maybe. Or maybe he would have left you a year later, after you moved in with him. You're not even giving me a chance to try. I'm not stopping you from trying. I'm just not helping you hide the truth about your life anymore. Casey started crying again and hung up the phone, and I continued to sit on the motel porch, sipping my evening tea and listening to the sound of the surf. Somewhere 400 miles away, my daughter was learning to be a mother of 3 children without any help. It was a painful process, but a necessary one. On Friday, I decided to look at apartments for long-term rent. Living in a motel was convenient but expensive, and I wanted to find my own place where I could really settle down. The realtor showed me several options, and I particularly liked one, a small studio 2 blocks from the beach, with a tiny kitchen, a cozy living room, and an alcove bedroom. The previous tenant was also an elderly lady, said the realtor. She lived here for 3 years and was very happy. She said that for the first time in her life, she felt truly free. The apartment was bright, with large windows and a view of the garden where orange trees grew. The furniture was simple but comfortable. A sofa, a dining table for 2, bookshelves, and a TV. Just what a single woman needed for a peaceful life. I'll take it, I said without hesitation. On Saturday, I moved from the motel to my new apartment. I unpacked my things, arranged my books on the shelves, bought groceries and flowers for a vase. For the first time in many years, I had a place where no one but me made decisions about what to buy, where to put the furniture, what time to get up, and what time to go to bed. On Saturday evening, Casey called. This time she spoke more quietly, tiredly. Mom, I realize you're not coming back. You're right. I'll have to quit my job. I can't leave Ethan in daycare until he's 6 months old, and a nanny costs more than I earn. What are you going to do? Stay home. Live on alimony from Steve and whatever you leave me. The letter says there's enough money for several years. Enough if you spend wisely. And then what? Ethan will grow up, go to kindergarten, and I'll be able to go back to work. But that's years, Mom. I'll lose my qualifications, my experience. But you'll gain the experience of motherhood, I replied without sentimentality. But I didn't want to be a housewife. I wanted to work, to build a career. Then you should have thought about that earlier, before you had children. But back then, I had you. Casey's voice became pleading. You always helped. I expected it to always be that way. You miscalculated. The conversation ended with more tears and reproaches. Casey still hoped to find a way to return to her old life, where someone else solved her problems. But that life was gone. On Sunday morning, I went to the beach especially early, when the sun was just rising above the horizon, painting the sky in soft pink tones. There was almost no one on the sand, only a few joggers and early birds like me. I sat down on a large rock at the water's edge and tried to imagine what was happening in my former home. It was 7:30 on a Sunday morning. Ethan was probably awake and demanding breakfast. Casey would get up, sleepy eyed, make him a bottle, and rock him in her arms, trying to calm him down. Chloe and Ryan are still asleep. Kids like to sleep in on weekends. At this time, I used to be up, making breakfast for everyone, planning the day, thinking about what to make for lunch, and making sure I didn't forget to buy something at the store. My whole life was scheduled down to the minute according to other people's needs. Now I was sitting on a beach in Florida, thinking only about where to go for breakfast and what book to read afterwards. My life belonged only to me, and the feeling was almost intoxicating. The phone rang at 8:30. It was Casey again. I stared at the screen for a long time, then answered. Mom, the kids are asking if they can talk to you. This was the hardest part. I loved my grandchildren and missed them, but I knew that talking to them could shake my resolve. Better not. But they miss you. Chloe asks every day when you're coming back. Ryan tries to help me, but he's just a kid himself. They need to get used to the fact that you're their only adult now. But I can't handle it, Casey cried. I don't know how to manage 3 kids on my own. I don't know how to balance housework and caring for a baby. You'll learn. Millions of women manage it. They have husbands, relatives, friends. Then you need to look for support elsewhere. Groups of young mothers, neighbors, the church community. People are willing to help if you ask them in the right way. What if I can't cope at all? What if social services decide that the children are living in unsuitable conditions? The thought hadn't occurred to me, and it frightened me, but I forced myself to speak calmly. Then you need to do everything you can to cope. The children are your responsibility now. Mom, please. Casey's voice became quiet and desperate. I realize I was wrong. I'm ready to change, to be more attentive to you, to help more. Just come back. No, Casey, it's too late. I hung up and turned off the phone. Then I sat on a rock for a long time, looking at the ocean and thinking about whether I was doing the right thing. Of course, I had doubts, but every time I imagined returning to my old life, I felt a knot of horror inside. I deserved the right to a peaceful old age. I deserved the right to live for myself, and no one should care whether it was selfish or not. The sun rose higher, and the beach began to fill with people. I got up from the rock and went to have breakfast at my favorite cafe, where oatmeal with berries and coffee without sugar were waiting for me. It was the usual start to an ordinary day in my new life.